All right, if we could begin again, please. I think All right, it's time to start. We're going to move on to new business. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to new business. If I could have board members back to their seats, please. You don't want to hear my teacher. That's what I said, I needed a gavel. All right, our next item for new business is our Teachers for Tomorrow Teacher Preparation Program. We have Scott Bogan.
Good morning, members of the board. You may recall that we had a presentation from Teachers of Tomorrow back, I believe, in November of last year. Teachers of Tomorrow seeks approval to offer a transition to teaching program in Indiana for elementary, K-6, secondary 512, and preschool through grade 12. Teachers of Tomorrow is headquartered in Houston, and they have been preparing educators since 2005. They've placed over 42,000 teachers in Texas alone since that day, and 7,000 nationwide in 2016. 68% of their teachers are still teaching after 5 years, which is good. A unique feature of this program is the fact candidates only pay a small fee up front and nothing else until they have secured a teaching position. So at this point, the Indiana Department of Education, after a review of their proposal, recommends that the board approve Teachers of Tomorrow transition to teaching elementary, secondary, and P12. We also have Dave Saba, who spoke to you back in November to answer any additional questions that you may have.
Dr. Freitas.
Welcome back. Dave was my guest last calendar year to meet with the board just to preview what he was going to do, and at least I was impressed with the out-of-the-box thinking for a teacher prep program, which I was excited about. And so it's nice to see you back with a recommendation for approval from the Department of Education. And it's my understanding that in this approval process, Scott, he had to appear before a group of higher education people,
Right.
a panel of higher ed people. Can you
Right.
just briefly explain what that entails?
Right, we have a group, we call it NPREP, it's Indiana New Program Review Committee, and they're comprised of 5 from higher ed. We have one teacher who's a high school teacher, but we want to have one teacher as a member. And we also have one local school superintendent. And this group, we meet the third Friday of each month, except on St. Patrick's Day, which we canceled. We'll never make that mistake again. Yeah, parking was a nightmare. But we meet monthly, and then they make a recommendation. But they're a recommending body. The department still makes the final move forward as far as what we suggest to you.
This program then received the endorsement of
Yes.
this higher education panel.
Right. They were very impressed, actually.
And sometimes that's unusual, you know,
Right.
you have an out-of-the-box alternative pathway to teacher licensure. Sometimes it's not seen by those who have a self-interest in it as positive. So I think it's a really a tribute to you, Dave, and to your program. Dave, can you talk about the financial part of it? Something I learned early on was that students who enroll into this program, their financial commitment is really not a lot of money. Can you just review that for a second with us?
Yes, and first off, thank you for bringing us back, and thank you for encouraging us to come forward and apply. The process was an outstanding process, we believe, a very strong process. It allowed us to really customize a program for Indiana. And the financial thing is something that our two founders, when they started the program in 2005, they wanted to put it all on the line, basically, and say, if we're not going to be successful, then we shouldn't earn anything from our students. So our teachers have to get hired or we're not successful. And they're only going to get hired if they're high-quality people that are going in and making a difference in schools. And so the way he structured the financials of the program is they pay a low $295 to get in the program, do all of their pre-work, get all of their counseling with our advisors who help them walk through the complex process of becoming a teacher, and they don't pay another dime unless they actually start working as a teacher in a school and are earning a wage as that teacher, and then they pay $400 a month. We spread that out over the year, the first 10 months, so that it also makes it easy for them financially to be able to become a teacher, because that's a huge barrier. And we also believe that's why we attract a more diverse group into our program. 46% of our teachers are non-white.
So you're saying during the time of their teacher prep program, they're not paying any fee other than a small application fee.
Yes.
And so they go through the program cost-free, and when they get a job, then it's $400 a month to pay off the tuition.
Correct. And they're still getting that extra support and the extra content during that first year as well. And that's critical, we believe, in that 68% 5-year retention rate.
I see a phone bank over there. All the phones are ringing off the hook. I try to sign up for this program, by the way.
Well, and I will tell you what we did and what we're going to do in Indiana is we're going to waive the $295 fee as well in this first 4 months to get people in the program. We just did that in South Carolina, where we accepted just 2 weeks ago, and we have 300 people that have already applied to be in the program in South Carolina in just 2 weeks by waiving that application fee. We figure it's going to be even higher here in Indiana. That's a huge impact. A lot of those people won't make it in the program, won't make it into the classroom, but that's a great start as far as starting to address the teacher shortages here in Indiana.
Quality and rigor are really important to this board, and so you meet all of the standards for accreditation. You pass through some alignments and matrices between your program and how it meets Indiana standards and national standards. So that's not a concern at all. So we're talking about a rigorous program that meets the same standards, but it's just a different pathway to get to teacher licensure.
Absolutely. And like I said at the beginning, the application process through Indiana, the reason we're here is because that process was very clear and concise, and working with Scott and his team, they explained exactly what we would have to do, what was needed, and that was absolutely critical for us to put together then an Indiana-specific program that could meet all those standards. But it really is a tribute to Indiana that it was that not easy, but it was that clear on what was necessary to become a quality program here.
It will lead to Indiana licensure in one of 3 areas: K-6, K-12, and
K-12 or secondary 5-12.
or secondary. So it covers
Transition
the
to teaching,
License.
so it could be a variety of areas.
Yes.
so it covers the full spectrum. So if you're out there watching, certainly it might be a program for you. Last set of questions deal with the partnership with schools. It's really critical in your program to have school partnerships, because these are people going through your program who need to be employed.
Yes.
That's really the key. So what progress have you made at Indiana to partner with schools?
We have spent a lot of time with Indiana Public Schools, mainly listening to where their shortage areas are, what their needs are. We have talked to a couple of charter schools as well. We've talked to Goodwill, just to look at really what their needs are. And then it's incumbent upon us to then give them, what we do is we just provide lists of our candidates that are ready to go and become teachers, and then the schools select who they want to hire. So it's really, for them, it's a win-win. There's no cost to them. There's really just the support of any new teacher that they have to work with, but they know they can select from a group of candidates, which gives them what they need. And our advisors spend a lot of time working with people so that If somebody says they want to teach elementary in one of the wealthy suburbs, we say, no, that's not going to happen. You're not going to get that job. If you want to teach middle school math and want to go to Indiana Public Schools where there are great jobs and great schools to work with, that's what we can help work with you. But you're not going to come into our program. We're not going to accept you in our program, really, if that's your goal, because we can't help you achieve that goal.
It's my understanding you forged a partnership with Dr. Farabee in Indianapolis Public Schools, and will that be your primary focus to start?
It will be, but we will, you'll see some internet marketing go up. If you try to search how to become a teacher next week, you'll see that we are going to be one of those ways on how to become a teacher, and that will go statewide. So while we are initially focusing here because we know there are going to be a lot of open positions come July, then we want to make sure that we can help them with that. We probably will not have people ready right for the start of school, but for that second wave of hiring that people have in August and September where there are still those open positions, we're going to start helping to pick those off and get those full.
What's your projected number of students for the next year? When you come back for your annual report with us, what do you think the number of students will be?
I'd like to undercommit and overperform, but so I would say somewhere around the 150 range, but based upon that response that we just had in South Carolina by waiving that initial fee and where there's a lot of excitement about a new program like this coming in, I think it may even be higher than that.
I think the organization's on fire, proof with what's happening in South Carolina, and hopefully in Indiana you can grow as quickly as the need is there. What's interesting too, it's driven by school districts needing assistance. You're not coming in preparing a whole bunch of people who may or may not get jobs. And of course we see some of those people come back to the board and say, I was prepared by a particular institution and now there's no job for me. And so this really changes the dynamics here. They may be prepared, but they must get a job. And the connection there is much tighter and much aligned than when we've seen in the past where it may not have been aligned.
Yeah, and that's what recruiters and HR people love. It's had them having a choice to put the right educator with the right classroom. It's not just about, hey, here's a bunch of bodies, put them in your school. It's about that recruiter and that HR professional saying, okay, here's 5 people interviewing for that job. I finally get to select the best one for that school and making sure that's truly the right connection for that school.
Okay. Thanks for coming back. I'm excited about your organization being here. I'll turn it back to the chair for other questions.
Yes, again, thank you. A couple questions around, so essentially they're paying $4,000 over the course of a year for your program, correct?
Yes.
You're waiving the fee, and then you will work to place these teachers in schools throughout Indiana.
Yes.
Correct? But the reverse of that could happen as well, right? In which school districts and others could identify prospective teachers and then put them through your program, correct?
Correct.
And school districts could also offer incentives like a $4,000 incentive for teachers to go through your program.
Correct. We do have schools that reimburse for,
And could pay for that.
yes, can pay for the
So
fee.
for 150 teachers for $600,000, those could be incentives for a number of people to actually go through this transition teaching program.
Correct.
I'm just thinking about different incentives that we could put out or someone could put out that could identify individuals who are interested in a second career, want to teach our children, or are highly qualified, that we could incentivize to actually go through a transition teaching program. So
We just submitted an application in Nevada. They have an annual fund that they set aside for all teacher preparation programs, and you actually submit the names of people that are teaching high-needs subjects that will guarantee that they're going to teach in a high-needs school for 3 years, and they get a full scholarship to go through the program and then go teach in those schools. And it is very cost-effective at $4,000 or $4,300 a person to do that.
I would encourage you to continue to pursue that here.
Thank you.
So I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Dave, one of the things that has come before this board a few times now has been an issue of students passing core standards and the exam for licensure. And I know in looking at your data, you guys seem to have a good handle on this in the states that you've been in. And I appreciate the fact that the department, I've been involved in a meeting with them already to look at this and look at that issue. But could you speak a little bit to what you all are doing, just because I think it would be great for the board and the public to know what some of your track record is on that, because I've been impressed with that piece from you all.
We've found, obviously through experience since 2005, that passing tests for all people seems to be getting harder and harder. The teaching tests in particular are also becoming more critical. We have built basically around that then some test preparation to make sure that our teachers are successful, because we want them to succeed and we want that kind of retention. So our pass rate on the pedagogy exam in Texas is above 90%, and our pass rate on the subject matter exams, we are now building in, because we're now accountable for that in Texas, we're building in test prep for that as well, so that, because the average age going through our program is 32. So you may have been great at algebraic functions back in, college, but you may have forgotten some of those. So having some sort of refresher to make sure that your subject matter knowledge is ready to go as well. And then on the core subject as well, the test to, the preliminary test on basic skills, our math people are great at math. They may not be so great at writing. And our ESL, our English language people are great at writing and vocabulary, but they're not going to be so great on the math. So having some preparation around that so that they can pass those exams as well. We want those people in the classroom, those that are willing to work. We're going to help them work to make sure they get the pass rate that they need.
One other question. So anyone from anywhere could enroll in your program to get licensed in Indiana, correct?
Correct.
Once this is approved.
Yes.
And then once they're licensed in any particular state, reciprocity rules would take effect, correct?
Yes, after they get their full
Once they
license
get their
mostly.
full
Most people would not
license.
take a transition to teaching. So if you only worked here for a year, you probably may not be able to take your transition to teaching license to another state.
Right. Now, the transition to teaching permit is issued while someone is actually in the program. And then once they complete the program, then they can apply for the.
That's correct. So once they're fully licensed in Indiana through the transition, then they could go through reciprocity, and the same with others coming to Indiana.
Right, correct.
So we could target those students who are in your program now in other states and use reciprocity to attract them back to Indiana.
We could.
That's a
It
good
was-
idea.
That was probably the other interesting thing about South Carolina.
I'd like to do that.
Out of the 300 that we had in South Carolina, 50 were from North Carolina, 40 were from Georgia, applying to go into the program and cross the border and teach. That was due to some great, we had some great press coverage right from the get-go, and it was just, it's kind of amazing, and it was great because we have some legislation going through North Carolina to say, hey, I just recruited 50 or potential teachers in South Carolina. Wouldn't it be great to have them here? But yes, once we have a great website, and all of our states have all of the states listed. So if somebody from Texas has decided they want to come to beautiful Indiana, that they could do that.
How do you make those teacher candidates available? Can we find out who's in your program right now?
We do. We actually have done that for Nevada because Clark County is so short on special ed teachers, and we have a solid cadre of special ed teachers. So we have on occasion gone ahead, and we would probably do the same thing for IPS, is just say, look, here's the need right now. If you're willing, if you want to come up to Indiana and work, here's the jobs that are open right now in Indiana public schools. And if you want to come forward, there are different curriculum. If they were just starting our program, they would have to do some of the specific Indiana curriculum that we have developed, but that wouldn't take them that long, and they could make that transfer up here.
Thank you.
Right.
One comment. I think my colleague is going to make this approval conditional, that we get 10 students from Texas, 10 from South Carolina.
I like it.
Are you going that way?
I am going.
Add that to the motion. Is there a motion to approve the Teachers for Tomorrow teacher
So
preparation?
moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes. All right, then we have next the American College of Education Teacher Preparation Program. Thank you, Dave. Scott, you get to...
Yes, well, we actually have two from the American College of Education. The first one is Teachers of English Learners Licensure Addition Only program. It's not for initial licensure, it's only for adding on to an existing license. It's an 18-credit program. It's all online, and it's could be applied to a master's in education offered by the American College of Education. We have reviewed, the team did review the proposal and do recommend that it be approved by the board. We do have a representative, Dr. Tiffany Hamlet, Chair of the Department of Teaching and Learning, who can answer any additional questions that you may have about the English Learners Program. And we also have Dr. Kathy McKay, who can answer any questions regarding the virtual education program, which we'll present in just a moment. And she's the Chair of the Department of Professional Education Studies. And I might add that Tiffany is also from Texas, so we are well represented today by people who traveled quite a distance to be here today. So, any questions?
Dr. Freeman.
I have a few questions for Tiffany. Thanks for being here. Thanks for flying up
Thank you.
today. And can you get us a few people from Texas to come to Indiana too?
Maybe. I'll see what I can do.
Okay. The program that you're offering is fully online. It's not a hybrid program where students take some of their coursework online and some face-to-face. And so that raises some delivery questions for me. In an online program, how do you maintain that relationship with students so that it's a productive, nurturing kind of endeavor that you would have face-to-face with the student?
So our courses are set up to offer a mix of it's all asynchronous, but students are required to engage in discussion boards as well as application-based assignments. So the instructors of these courses have, their role is to facilitate the course and interact with the students. So a lot of the interaction takes place on the discussion board. So they'll discuss a topic that's relevant to the course. Typically, it's addressing something that's taking place in a classroom setting, or it's a public topic, a current event type of issue. So the instructor interacts with the students a lot through the discussion board. Obviously, if the student has a specific question, they can email the instructor. Instructors are required to respond within 24 hours to those questions. Most respond much quicker than that because of technology. The vast majority of my instructors typically respond within an hour because they answer from their cell phone, as a lot of us do anyway. The assignments are field-based, so the students actually have an application piece where they're actually doing something in the classroom, and the instructors are then grading the assignments, providing feedback. They have a very specific time range in which they're required to provide the feedback. The assignments build on each week, so the instructors will give the feedback to the students, who will then take that feedback and make adjustments for the next assignment that they are implementing in their classroom. So there's a lot of very hands-on interaction pieces with a lot of feedback and guidance from the instructor occurring on a regular basis.
I have a question about the online instructors. One is qualifications, and number two, how many students are assigned to each instructor?
So a course maximum capacity is set at 33 students. So the most an instructor would have in one class is 33. All our instructors have a doctoral degree in the specified field. So our teachers who would be teaching in our English Language Learners program have an EDD or PhD in bilingual education or secondary or second language learning. So it's very specific to that discipline.
The other question I had deals with alignment of standards, and that's a real important thing for me, that this is a pathway that is as rigorous as a traditional program. And certainly in the matrices that you provided, I can see that alignment. But in implementation, how do you implement in such a way that you can guarantee that each and every student has met all of the standards, including Indiana standards in this program?
So our assignments and discussion boards, anything that's a graded activity is specifically aligned to a specific standard within the course. So when we set up our courses, we have a blueprint that we use to map all those pieces out. So we might have a specific assignment that meets the specific Indiana standard. We'll also show where that meets a CAPE standard or where it meets an HLC standard, so we can trace that throughout the program. When we do our program reviews, we can go back for even down to a very granular level, and look at where one student scored on a specific test question and what was the mastery of that question in terms of where it aligned with our standards that was identified with when we created the course.
Because this is an add-on, Scott, are these people required to take some kind of a state test?
Yes, there is
Also-
an assessment.
And so that, is there any projection on, these students haven't taken the test, obviously.
Right.
And so how do you prepare students for our state tests in Indiana, Tiffany? Is that part of the program or is that separate?
We do not have a test prep built into our program. Our courses would be aligned to the Indiana standards, so the content should be aligned with what would be addressed on the test.
So once we get some data based on how many students are passing, it may be that all your students are passing or a high percentage, but if it turns out that you have a significant number not passing, would you be willing to potentially institute some kind of test prep to help your students? And it could be online even.
That is probably something we would discuss. I know with our educational leadership program, we do have courses that do help students in state-specific areas prepare for the licensure exams. So for Florida, we have a Florida prep course that students have the option of taking. So if we did see that there was a specific need, we would have the capacity to create that for students going through this program.
Last question for me deals with the number of students you think will be enrolled in year one and maybe year three. Any idea what you're projecting?
Typically, we start out very small. So I know just based on past growth, we start out typically maybe 20 students in the first couple terms, and then typically we see substantial growth. So I would anticipate our first group would probably be very small, maybe 20, and within a year, hopefully we would have 60, and then by 3 to 4 years, my guess would be about 150. That's just an estimate simply because I know our current program, this specific program, I think we have close to 400 students right now going through different routes in our master's program, whether it's ESL or our Teaching English Learners master's degree. So I'm just estimating based on those numbers.
Is the program delivered in a cohort model where you bring in 20 students together and they go through the entire program together, or is it individualized? People can jump in and out when need be?
It's individualized. So whenever they start, if they take time off, then when they come back, they'll just pick up with whatever coursework they have left to complete the program.
Are you offering this program in other states?
So any student could come in and take these courses, but then they would only be approved for the Indiana piece. But a lot of students come in and take this because they can get professional development credit in their state. We're just not aligned with those states at this time.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the proposal.
Thank you.
Dr. Bertram?
Yeah, again, thank you. What is the cost per credit hour?
$266
$266 a credit hour.
approximately.
And what is your current completion rate in your existing programs?
Typically, I believe right now it's close to 90%.
So 90% of the people who enroll in any of your programs complete those
Yes.
programs. And the question was around the success rate on state exams for teacher preparation programs. What is your success rate at this point?
So we only have, our MAT and TDQ program is probably one of our smallest cohorts, and those are our only two programs that would have a licensing exam at this time to complete in my department. So all our students, I believe at this point, we've had about 99% successful can go through and complete this. Again, it is a relatively small group, but we have been above the state standards for that consistently.
Great, thank you.
Can I have one more comment? Scott and I have been talking about what should be presented with institutions coming forward. I had asked sometime in the future that pass rates and things like that be presented in our board packet at the same time. I think it's important for us to look at past history of an institution. And so probably within a few months, I hope Scott will be having a template to show you where we give you pass rates and other kinds of things so you see the rigor and the credibility of a university as they come forward.
And actually, I just sent one out a couple days ago, so it's...
Oh, it's set right now? Okay, I'll take it.
One other question. Are students going through a transition in teaching or a licensure-only program eligible for financial aid?
Our program does not take financial aid.
You do not take any financial aid?
Not, if they sought maybe a personal loan through a bank, that's fine, but our school doesn't take, we don't offer financial aid through our university. So it's all paid for by the student out of pocket, or if they seek a loan through a private service.
And pay as you go?
And pay as you go, yes.
So then you have an additional presentation.
Oh, yes.
Second.
Are we going to take a vote on them separately or
Currently, I have listed to take them together.
together? Okay. All right, and the second one again is for virtual instruction. Virtual instruction is a unique program and I'm talking about for Indiana, in that, first of all, it's not required that you be licensed in virtual instruction to teach in a virtual instructional setting. However, many of our teachers do seek to gain that extra preparation and training in order to teach in that setting. So it can only be added to an existing valid Indiana teaching license, and it's really not a content area, it's more of a pedagogical program, and it only applies to the grade settings that currently are listed on that valid license. So it's very specific to individual licenses. The virtual instruction proposal from American College of Education is a 22 credit hour program designed as a licensure addition program. After review of the proposal, the Indiana Department of Education recommends the board approve this proposal. And again, we have a representative to answer any additional questions.
Questions? Is there a motion to approve the American College of Education teacher preparation programs?
So moved.
Is there a second? Is there further discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes. All right, then our next business item is Central Christian Academy request for choice scholarship waiver. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, go ahead. Public comment.
Good morning, almost good afternoon. Mrs. Wicker, members of the board. My name is John Elsesser. I'm Executive Director of the Indiana Non-Public Education Association. I'd like to begin by offering our appreciation for you revisiting the appeal that was originally heard down in Evansville for Lutheran South Unity, Central Christian Academy, and Turning Point, where we were one vote short of a statutory majority. As I mentioned last month in Evansville, I've been working with 3 of these schools for about 2 years on the issue that we bring before you today. They really were the impetus behind the language in House Enrolled Act 1384. An additional 4th school has also submitted an appeal today, Trinity Lutheran of Indianapolis. They serve a similar demographic. Their circumstances are different than the other 3 schools, but they've also demonstrated significant improvement. And just to clarify from a couple comments that my friend John O'Neill made, the pool of schools that could apply for this, there are 9 schools in consequence, and not all of those 9 would even meet the criteria. So there's not going to be any major flood of schools applying for waivers. Just to provide a little bit of context and background, I shared a little bit this when I was in Evansville. One of the reasons why we were pursuing this issue with those original 3 schools was back in 2016. You remember the General Assembly passed what they called a Hold Harmless Bill, Senate Enrolled Act 200, which was really fast-tracked through the legislative process in response to changes in standards and assessment and some of the problems that we had with the ISTEP administration and scoring, which resulted in significant ISTEP score drops. We believe that the legislative intent was that schools would not be harmed because of those changes and those problems. Being held harmless had to do with both the application of a grade and the application of consequences. And to a great extent, Senate Enrolled Act 200 and a subsequent resolution passed by the state board addressed those issues and held most of those schools harmless. The schools appealing today, along with just a few others, were not held harmless, primarily because of a language interpretation. Had they been, 3 of the 4 schools would already be out of consequences and would not even be here today. You know, last year we explored administrative and legislative remedies to no avail. In talking to department staff, they felt like the statute didn't provide significant flexibility for them to intervene, and when working with state board staff, they felt like it really didn't come currently under the state board's jurisdiction. Now, as we fast forward 1 year, these 4 schools, through the hard work of their administration and teachers, and the combination of the change of the A to F metric with an increased weighting growth, 2 of those schools have moved from Ds to As. 1 school moved from a D to a B, and the 4 school that newly applied today moved from an F to a B. During the 2017 General Assembly session, the legislature did provide a remedy in the language of House Enrolled Act 1384, which basically allows the same appeal option to you as the state board that a public school or a charter school could bring to you as it relates to consequences. Here in just a minute, to provide some further context and background for the appeals, each of the schools will make a presentation. Principal, as well as maybe a student or a parent, will be here as well. You know, last month, Mr. Watts made a very important statement, I thought, when he said that granting these appeals, we're not forcing any parents to go to any of these schools. We're merely making it an available option if a parent would choose and saw these schools as the right fit for their children. And I'll just conclude my comments just with a personal reflection. Now, I've been a private school administrator for 36 years. And I've served at all levels of an elementary principal, high school principal, superintendent, served on a school board, and now I run an association for private schools. You know, and as a young administrator, I thought it was best to kind of stay in the black and white area when I made decisions. It was easier to do that. You know, but over the years, I learned that what was in the best interest of my students wasn't always in that black and white area. Sometimes we had to venture into the gray areas to make decisions that were best for kids. And I really think that's what the General Assembly did when they came to this conclusion. And they empowered you, the state board, to venture into those gray areas. That situations like we're talking about today may not be best addressed in the black and white, but we have to kind of venture into the gray as well. And it would be our hope that you consider these appeals, that you step away from all of the school choice rhetoric, both pro and con, and really make decisions that are in the best interest of students, best interest of the parents, and the best interest of the communities that these schools serve. And we believe that a waiver in these circumstances would be merited. So we greatly appreciate your consideration. Happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you,
I
John.
have a couple questions. You thought you were going to get away.
I did. I tried.
Quicker next time. The law in what the General Assembly passed was an opportunity for a waiver or delay, correct? So it gave both an option if the law as it was written does not apply uniformly, which is very difficult for any public policy to be applied uniformly and receive uniform outcomes, right? So the whole idea of a waiver or delay is for us to be able to consider those differences and how it's applied and make those decisions. So it does allow for a delay as well, correct?
Correct.
So to say if a school actually exceeded performance in what was two Cs or greater, and we believe that there is evidence to suggest that this school has exceeded that, that could be delayed because under the law and the statute, they would have to come back anyway, correct?
Right,
Unless
exactly.
they received another C or better in the subsequent year, and then those sanctions would be relieved.
If the schools are in that level of consequence where it only takes, 1 additional year for them to get out of consequences, then yes, they would be. If not, they would have to come back to you again. Even if they scored a C or above, they would have to come back for an additional waiver. If they went down, then, the waiver is only for 1 year, so they would, lose the ability to take new students unless they came in and appealed again.
Yeah, so from my perspective, this is really about a matter of choice. It's about restricting choice or opening choice and giving families and parents and children the opportunity to go to the school that meets their needs. And I tend to believe that parents can make informed decisions about what's good for their children. And any opportunity we have to certainly hold schools accountable, but at the same time not restrict choice is the best interest of Indiana and Hoosier families. So I concur with your position on that. Thank you.
Now?
Yeah, thank you. Did we have additional public comment?
Good morning. Good morning. I am Dathan Torres. I am a current student at Central Christian Academy. I just want to talk to you guys today about what the voucher program has done for me and my family. I come over to Central Christian Academy my freshman year after leaving Northwest High School. When I found out about Central Christian Academy, it was through a guy in my church, and he told me, he said, you should come over to Central Christian Academy. At the time, it was Baptist Academy. And then we had our name changed. Sorry. When I first come over to Baptist Academy at the time now, Central Christian Academy, I was struggling with a lot of things, and the environment that I was in, it just wasn't working out for me. And I saw an opportunity to change the way things were in my life, and I wanted changed. And I took that opportunity of coming over to the academy. And it's just been a big blessing in my life. I've learned to be patient. I've learned to give people the opportunity to get to know me, stop having a wall, because I start to put up a wall and block people out. But the school changed that, and without the voucher program, I probably would be doing other things that I shouldn't be doing. And again, without the vouchers, I wouldn't have had the opportunity that I do have now. I am going to my senior year at the academy. It's been a great, the best choice I've ever made in my life to come over to the school. And right now, I know becoming a senior, going into my senior year, I have the younger students looking up to me, and I just want to be a good leader for them and everything. So that's what I want to share with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have from Central Christian Academy, I'm going to have the last name, David.
Good morning, members of the board. Thank you for allowing Dathan, awesome young man, to come and present and share his story, and allowing me to come and talk to you before you take your vote. I want to talk a little bit about Central Christian Academy, who we are, who we serve, and why we're here this morning actually asking for this waiver. So we've been serving families in our neighborhood, it's known as the Bean Creek neighborhood, since 1971. We were originally part of Villa Baptist Church using the name Baptist Academy. In 2012, we changed our name to better reflect who it is that we were serving. For almost 40 years, we were serving primarily a Caucasian working class neighborhood. As the dynamics of that and the church began to change, we wanted to make sure the school was there for the community and not just as an arm of the church. And so in 2015, we actually separated the organizations, and Central Christian Academy is now its own independent nonprofit educational institution. Why am I here specifically today? What's the story, kind of the context behind us asking for that? So Central Christian Academy did things, and it did them with excellence for a very long time, but at some point, things started to slip. That became apparent after we received 2 consecutive D grades and were informed that we had lost the ability to take new voucher students. Obviously, this was catastrophic for us because with the change in the demographic of the families that we served, voucher students and that revenue is an increasingly important part of the money that we were getting to deliver our education. So we started to make some improvements. We hired Dr. Peggy Hinckley to come in, work with our faculty to start doing things using more data-driven results, and we saw some success. Unfortunately, we started doing that right at that same time that Mr. Elsesser mentioned, where the entire state had what I'll call a hiccup with the I-STEP test. It was such a big hiccup that the legislature passed that hold harmless law. The problem is for us, we weren't held harmless, and so we got into a 3rd consecutive D, which meant we had to have 2 years now of getting a good grade. So we doubled down on making improvements. In addition to hiring Dr. Hinckley, we brought in additional consultants to begin working with both the administration and mentoring the academic staff, as well as working with our non-academic staff. We implemented NWEA testing 3 times per year. We wanted to know where our kids were at before they got to the I-STEP. And so if we needed to make adjustments during the year, not that we're teaching to the test, but understanding where the kids are coming in, because in the demographic we're serving, sometimes we get kids that come in 2 and 3 grade levels behind, and we don't turn them away and we don't cancel them out. We bring them in and we serve them. The problem is we didn't have the ability to serve them well enough to get the good grades because we didn't have the data early enough in the school year. So we fixed that. We also started attending conferences, sending our faculty and staff to things like the Indiana Non-Public Education Association has an educators and administrators conference. So we sent our teachers there, one, so they could start learning about best practices, not just from what our administration was telling them, but from other people, and then also to do some peer networking. Many of you understand how important it is to be able to reach out to somebody who's been in your shoes, and so there are people all over the state, some of my coworkers, and then also the people who are here representing other schools that are serving an urban demographic. We need to hear each other's stories because we are all not turning away these students who are disadvantaged. We are bringing them in, some of whom can afford to pay and some of whom can't because we don't have new vouchers right now, but we're still bringing them in, still working with them. So we implemented all those changes and we are now an A school. The problem for us is if that grade had been given to us and we had been held harmless, we'd be taking new voucher students for the 17-18 year. As it stands right now, we don't have that ability. We fully expect that our grade for this most recent year will be an A or a B, and so we would be able to be out of consequence, but because of the timing issue, and I know it's in your packet, the memo that you guys saw, it doesn't allow it to take place until the following year, which would be 18-19. Well, what does that mean for our students and families and for people like Dathan? What it means is we're still going to bring them in. We are going to serve. We're going to find a way to keep our doors open, but it's going to hurt the quality of education we're able to give them. We're still going to get good grades. We're going to find a way. That's what we do in the inner city is we find a way. The problem is it's being made more difficult if we don't get this waiver. So what we're asking you for this morning is not to not hold us accountable. We've been held accountable. I love the question that you asked about do we have one standard. I would love to be held to the same standard as the public schools because I wouldn't be standing here today. We're held to a much higher standard, but we're serving the same population. I don't know about other private schools. I don't know about other schools that are doing things. I've got a lot of friends in that world, but at Central Christian Academy, our demographic, where it's growing the most are ethnic minorities from the inner city. And we want to continue to serve those families. We will find a way to continue to serve those families, but you can help us. You can make it easier by granting us this waiver that will give us more resources to hire a full-time resource teacher, which we want to do. Because again, we don't turn kids away if they've got learning differences. We bring them in. I can't afford to hire a full-time resource teacher right now, so I use parent volunteers. I know my time is short. I'll end with these few things. I just want to reiterate that we do on rare occasions ask students to leave for behavioral issues, but we do not turn away students who have learning differences to try and make our grade go up. We do not turn away students who can't afford our school. We do not even turn away students who don't share our religious tradition. We want to bring them into an environment where they're going to come to learn what it is that we believe, but whether they do or not, we want to provide them with a great education. Our mission statement says we want to train and prepare them for success in life. Granting this waiver will better equip us financially to serve the students and families in our community and to provide a great educational choice for more children. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Question?
I actually have a question, I think, for legal counsel, and just curious. If a student was enrolled at Central Christian Academy and wanted to leave that school to go to a traditional public school, and that traditional public school had received 3 years of consecutive Fs, would that student be permitted to enroll at that school?
I'm not legal counsel, but I can tell you yes. No, sorry, okay.
No, please, really. Go for it. You're qualified, great. So let's go.
I defer. Now, of course, there are all kinds of other factors that would have to be accounted for here, such as the timing, like what time of the school year. But let's say it's just a very simple situation. End of school year, you transfer to a new school. Yes. The answer would be yes. They'd be able to
So there would be no restriction that family choosing to go to the traditional public school, just regardless of the grades that school had
Yeah,
received.
and again, I just have to qualify it because I mean, obviously, you'd have to still be in the same school corporation, something like that. But assuming
Or exercising choice in open enrollment, correct?
Yeah.
So it wouldn't have to be within their geographic boundary. They could go to any school that would accept a student in open enrollment, correct?
Yes. Again, just there are some things that could pop up as being effective, but the simple answer is yes.
But it wouldn't be based on the grades
Correct.
of the school. It'd be based on the parents' right to choose that school.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Don't go away, Tim. Let's go back to hold harmless. I was a little concerned about the comments about hold harmless. Is that the case for all voucher schools? What was the situation?
I think Brian says he's got some additional background there.
So I can give some background on this because I lived through this through the prior administration and the department. The department administers choice scholarships, so they are tasked with the responsibility of interpreting the statutes that pertain to choice scholarships, which include the hold harmless provisions. Now, the language in the hold harmless law as it relates to choice scholarship schools said those entering consequence. So there's 3 tiers of consequence. At that time, the Department of Education interpreted that to mean that only schools that would enter that first category are held harmless. But if you're already in, you're not held harmless.
Say that again.
So that the interpretation of the department at that time, there are 3 tiers of consequences for choice scholarship schools, for private schools to accept vouchers. And the law said that if you enter a consequence, that you're held harmless. And so the question became, how do you interpret that? Do you interpret that as schools that enter the first stage of consequence, or do you apply that to each stage, because each stage is a new consequence? And so at that time, the department's legal interpretation was that it only applies to that first category. Does that make sense? In other words, schools just coming on.
Okay, so Central, am I saying that right? Central Christian Academy, what was their timeline? Come on back up. So stay there, Brian. So explain to me a little bit more about your timing and the fact that you weren't able to be held harmless.
So our first 2 years of Ds, which we don't dispute, happened when the rest of the state was still taking I-STEPS. It was the approved test. It was the third D that we received. That was the year, and I believe that was the 14-15 school year. That was the year the test was deemed to be a bad test. The average state scores dropped, I believe, 33%. Ours dropped by 2%. So relatively speaking, we were 31% ahead of everybody else. We still dropped, but we had made significant changes and improvements that kept us over 30% above the norm across the state. The held harmless law was passed to invalidate all of the grades and anybody going into consequence for that 14-15 year. But because we were already in consequence, we were not held harmless. If you remove that grade, if you just say we got no grade, and so we have those two Ds, the fact that we've already gotten an A grade, we shouldn't be in consequence. So if we were held harmless, we would already be out of consequence. It's the fact that we were not held harmless. We're being punished for that bad I-STEP test. That's why we got that third D. Everybody else in the state, other than 10 schools, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, John, there are only 10 schools in the entire state that were not held harmless, and 3 of them are here this morning. So when I say hold harmless, that's it. We threw out the grades. The legislature, you voted on the first bill that was passed. Everybody recognized we shouldn't be punishing schools. We're one of 10 who, because we were already in consequence, we were not held harmless, we were actually harmed. Does that answer the question?
I think you just referred to us as the legislature. But
No, the legislature had to pass, I think it was SC 200, and then there was another vote that had to take place from this body to be able to enact that.
State Board of Ed.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm a lawyer, but I try to be technically accurate.
I appreciate that explanation.
Okay.
Clears it up for me. Thanks.
So is there a motion to approve the Central Christian Academy Choice
So moved.
Scholarship? Is there further discussion? No further discussion. Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes. Okay. Public comment?
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
You know, I thought that the schools articulated, and John articulated their side very well. And I think, as I said at the last board meeting, I think this is a very close call. And I understand that there is legislation, new legislation that addressed this. The concerns that were raised at the last meeting, I felt have not really been addressed. And that is, number one, you know, John talked about gray areas, and there is a very much of a gray area for the board. This board has no guidelines, and we talked about that at the last meeting, no guidelines for determining improvement here. So I have concerns about that. Number two, I generally have a concern, and I've, you know, taken a lot of tough votes here in the last 4 years to close schools, to impose sanctions on schools. Even last month we did that. And I just feel strongly about accountability, and it's not, I believe very strongly in choice. Choice is very important. I'm not arguing against the Choice Scholarship Program at all. However, I also feel like there is a yin and a yang between choice and accountability. And I believe in this matter I fall a little bit slightly in favor of the stronger accountability. There's only 1 year of A or B in your instance, in this school's instance, an A. But before that, we had certainly 3 years of D or F. I can't recall the exact.
It depends on the school.
Yeah, it depends on the school. I have it written down here. So for Central Christian Academy, it was DFD. And I know there was a vote to hold harmless, but many people didn't necessarily agree with that at the time. So I also want to make the point that we're not talking about existing students either. So while this passed for Central Christian, even if it had not passed, it would not have applied to existing students. And just generally speaking, as it relates to waivers, I think they should be used relatively sparingly. And I just have, again, concerns about accountability. So just wanted to explain my vote.
I want to comment as well, because I think, Gordon, we've talked, and you make a lot of great points. I think ultimate accountability is when parents choose another option. You know, that's the whole idea of choice. is to say to families, we're going to give you a wide range of options, and you choose. And if your children's needs aren't being met, then you can go somewhere else. Okay? But to hear students whose needs are being met at a particular school, I think, from my perspective, is the most compelling issue. Okay? And when we look at school grades and so forth, you talked about sanctions and so forth, and I agree with accountability, and I want to be really clear about that as well, because I think that's the point you're making, is accountability is very important. But I don't think accountability is applied uniformly. And, you mentioned a school last month where there were sanctions. That occurred after 7 years of Fs, right? A very different situation. So I'm all for accountability as long as we're going to hold all schools accountable to the same expectation, the same standards, and that we have the political courage to take action when it's appropriate. And as long as if we're not going to do that, then we have to ensure that the best accountability measure is when parents choose. And I just feel very strong about that as well.
And I'm not disagreeing there, Vince. I mean, I think you make some very good points, and like I said, it's a close call, but I just feel from my perspective that I want to see that second year to be sure. I want to take a little more conservative approach.
Sure.
And I just want to see that second year of A, and I hope next year it is an A. And glad to hear about the success of the students who attend your academy. But I just guess I'm a little more cautious about it, and I want to see one more year before signing off. So that's just my personal opinion. I understand and respect the members who voted in favor of it today. So, thank you.
If I may, go ahead, I'm sorry I jumped in.
No.
If I may, I concur with what you're saying, Gordon. Want to make sure this isn't a one-year improvement, positive blip in student performance, and because there's certainly been 3 years consecutive of unsatisfactory performance, which is why we're in the situation we're in. When you talk about accountability, and I mentioned this last month, and I'm going to say it again, when we talk about vouchers or scholarships, whatever you want to call them, vouchers that come across the desks of voucher receiving schools, those schools are not held accountable to how those voucher dollars are spent. Any other charter school, public school, we have to account for every penny that comes across our desk, every penny. That's part of my concern as well. I know how some voucher receiving schools are spending their money. I've talked to the business managers in those schools. As an example, Ball State was sponsoring a charter of a school in Fort Wayne. Rightfully so, closed that charter school. The next year, that school with the same staff, the same students, opened as a voucher receiving school. That's an unintended outcome of the law as it exists. And if I were to say something to the legislators, I'd say let's make anybody who receives public dollars accountable for how those dollars are spent, and under the same guidelines and circumstances and efforts that public schools and charter schools receive. That's part of my concern as well. And I do agree with Gordon again that show me twice. And I think I checked earlier that the new school grades will be out in September, October for 16-17, is that correct? Brian? September, October more likely? September's a wish, October more likely, okay. Okay, thank you.
I think for me, I'm going to piggyback on what Vince said earlier. When you talk about every school that we're discussing today, every single student in every single building, that's the choice that their parent made to put them there. They don't have to go to that school because they live on a certain street or in a certain zip area code. Those parents chose to put those students there. And for someone who, you guys were all in our buildings last week. The school I'm at's amazing. We're going to see. It is a difficult thing to have the success that these schools have had. It's not a fluke, it's not a blip on the radar, oh, we had one good year. It is concerned, precise, dedicated effort of teachers and students. And that's why I think this legislation exists, because you should reward them for that. And when John talked earlier, he said we have to make sure that we have quality schools, and we want students in quality schools. And right now, we have quality schools, proven quality schools, that we have the option of saying, hey, this is a great school, and you can choose to send your kid here if you want to. But if we limit that, then we're saying, I mean, this isn't our A's and B schools, that we could potentially say, no, if you can't afford it on your own, you can't go there. And that's where I'm torn. I think that any time that we can allow parents the choice to make, that is our duty. And as Vince said, if they're not happy in that situation, they certainly have the option to choose another place. I mean, you have schools that are performing at a high level. And I think that we need to get as many students into all our high-performing schools as we can.